We have a very, very challenging Mishnah today. Very challenging Mishnah. So it's Mishnah 15, chapter 4, Mishnah 15, except what numbers are there? There must be 17 by now. 17, right? Okay, so Pirkei Avos Mishnah Tes Vav. There are two rabbis in the Mishnah. Both of them are lesser known rabbis. Each of them challenges us with a very difficult concept. One is very difficult from a philosophical perspective. The other is very difficult from a mystical perspective. Okay, so we'll see how much we get through it. Just to add to how difficult the first one is, minutes before arriving here, I got a call about somebody, a young person who passed away. Very unexpectedly, very suddenly. So it fits right into this Mishnah that we're about to learn. So there are two rabbis in the Mishnah. The one is called Rabbi Yanai, and the one is called Rabbi Masya ben Charash. Neither one of them is very well known. In fact, Rabbi Yanai is only mentioned in the Mishnah once. So it's the only time we get Rabbi Yanai's name. Rabbi Yanai is an interesting name because Yanai historically is a name that is associated with that whole Hellenistic period of Judaism. So it's unusual that there should be a rabbi who actually has this name. Now, Rabbi Yanai was a person who lived through an incredibly difficult period of Jewish history. We know that the Roman occupation of Israel was very harsh, but as it progressed, so it got harsher. And he lived through one of the most difficult periods of Roman occupation. He saw terrible suffering of his fellow Jews. He saw the massacres of huge portions of the Jewish community. And that lends itself to what he's going to say in this Mishnah. Rabbi Yanai himself was one of the expat Jews. Remember that at the time of the Roman occupation, many Jews were displaced. And that's really where the diaspora began, was at the time of the Roman occupation and the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yanai landed up in Rome. And he actually built the largest yeshiva in Rome at the time, which was a huge achievement. As you can imagine, it was a very difficult environment. And that's what he succeeded in doing. Rabbi Yanai is most well known for the fact that he was extremely careful not to ever look at anything that might be even somewhat immodest, somewhat not sneers. He would never look. And there's certain stories the Midrash tells us about how the Satan tried to tempt him, and eventually it became so extreme that he actually blinded himself, so he wouldn't be tempted. It's what we say, don't try this at home. It's a very heavy story, right? He is also, by the way, Rabbi Yanai is also the one who made very popular the concept that later on the Chafetz Chaim would use as the foundation of his whole specific area of teaching in Torah, which was, the Gemara tells a story, Rabbi Yanai was walking around and he came across a person who claimed to be a merchant. And the merchant said, I'm selling the elixir of life. And he said, what's that? I'd like to buy it. And he quoted the pasuk in Tehillim, Mi ha'ish Chafetz Chaim, who is the person who wants life? Watch how you speak. And Rabbi Yanai said, I've learned that pasuk for years and years and years, and I never saw it in that particular light. He was very grateful to this person for having taught it. So that's Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Masya ben Charash, he was a student of Rabbi Yishmael and subsequently a teacher of the two great luminaries of both the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan from the Jerusalem Talmud and Rav from the Babylonian Talmud. So also not necessarily such a well-known sage and scholar, but somebody who made a very important contribution, of course, to the next generation of the development of Torah and of the development of Talmud. So let's have a look at what they have to say. It does seem a little strange that we put all these things into the same Mishnah. Very big issues that we have to discuss over here. So Rabbi Yanai Oimer, Rabbi Yanai taught, Ein biyadenu. Now, if you had to translate that very literally, how would you translate that? Ein biyadenu. It is not in our hands, right? It is not in our hands. Now, that's an ambiguous statement in this context. So, Ein biyadenu, it's not in our hands. Loi mishalvas harashoim, not the peace or tranquility of wicked people. Ve'af loy miyusurei hatzadikim. And not even the suffering of tzadikim, of righteous people. So this is the most famous question that people always ask. Why do bad things happen to good people? Except that the way that Rabbi Yanai asks it, it's the other way around. Why do good things happen to bad people? That's his first question. His first point is, we don't understand why Rashaim have shalva, why they have tranquility in their lives. And then va'af, and we even don't understand why tzaddikim have suffering in their lives. It's an interesting way of proposing it because it makes it sound like it's more surprising to us that bad people have good things than the fact that good people have bad things. Interesting. Sounds almost like a little pessimistic, or maybe even a little cynical. Well, we expect that that good people have bad things. It surprises us that bad people will have good things. Okay, so we've got to explore that. That is Rabbi Yanai's teaching. Then Rabbi Masya ben Charash tells us two things that don't necessarily appear to be related to each other. He tells us, maktim b'shloim kol adam. You should always be the first to greet any person. Any person. It doesn't say older people. It doesn't say scholars. It doesn't say Jewish people. He says that you should always be the first person to greet any person. There's quite a well-known story. You might have heard it before. They tell a story about this group of shoichtim who used to fly to somewhere in Argentina, I think it was, where obviously they have a lot of beef. So they would fly there for a few days. They would shecht in this massive abattoir. And then they'd fly back to wherever it was that they had to go in the States. And on one particular occasion, the one shoichet accidentally landed up being locked in the fridge. And everybody was leaving, knocking off for the day. And the security guard at the entrance wouldn't allow people to leave. He said, but there's somebody missing. There's some person who hasn't come out. We've got to go find him. They were like, what are you talking about? Nobody keeps a register of everybody who goes in and out. Like, I'm sure he left, you just didn't notice. He says, I'm telling you, he's still there. And he insisted on the search party, and they went back in, and they rescued this man. Literally saved his life. So they asked the security guard, how did you notice? There's so many people. How did you notice he was missing? He said, because every single time he'd walk in, he'd greet me. And every single time he'd leave, he'd say goodbye. And he didn't come say goodbye today, so I knew that he was still inside. So it's not just good advice. Sometimes it's the kind of advice that could really make a difference. So you should always be the first to inquire after the well-being of other people, no matter who they are. And then he says something that honestly, it's really difficult to understand what he means. There's so many layers to what this could mean. Veheve zonav la'aroyos, rather be the tail of lions, ve'al tehiroish lashu'olim, and don't be the head of foxes. What's he telling us? To be the tail of lions, and don't be the heads of foxes. Okay, so there's quite a fair amount to unpack in this Mishnah. Let's start with the first subject, which we all know is a subject we could speak about for hours and hours and hours. Ein biyodenu means we don't have access. We don't have an understanding. It's very common, and almost all of the commentators on this Mishnah pointed out, it's very common in Talmudic language to say when we have a grasp of something, we say we have a handle on it, right? We even say that in English. We have it in hand. And when we don't understand something, we say it's out of reach. These are words relating to hands, right? We can't grasp the concept. So all of the commentators point out that effectively what Rabbi Yanai is telling us is that we don't understand Shalvas Harashoim, the peace of the wicked, and we don't even understand the difficulties and suffering of tzaddikim. Now, it's interesting how the various commentators come at this from very different angles. For example, one of the perspectives that's offered on this Mishnah, from a commentary called the Yochin, he says that Ein biyodenu could also mean we have not yet reached that level. Ein biyodenu, we haven't yet reached that level. On the one hand, lo mishal vas harashoyim. On the one hand, when we're about to speak about the level we haven't reached, we are definitely not so bad that we're like those wicked people who still have a good life. So that's loy biyadenu. That is no longer in our hands. We've graduated. He's kind of speaking to the audience and saying, we have graduated from the place where we're, God forbid, chas v'shalom, rishoim who have a good life. Now, why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing for a Rasha to have a good life? What's wrong with that? You know the very famous Gemara that says that there are essentially 5 categories of people in spiritual ratings. How do you get spiritual ratings? So there's 5 categories of people. There's what's called Tzaddik v'toiv loy, Tzaddik v'ra loy, Rasha v'toiv loy, Rasha v'ra loy, and Beinoni. Okay, let's unpack them. Let's see if we can translate these well. Tzaddik v'toiv loy. How do you translate that? At tzaddik v'toiv loy means, and it's good for him. That means a person who is both a tzaddik and lives a good life. By contrast, tzaddik v'ra loy means that the person is a tzaddik and they have a difficult life. Then you have Rasha v'toiv loy, a Rasha who has a good life. Rasha v'ra loy, a Rasha who has a bad life. And then the Beinoni, which is probably the most elusive of all 5 categories, the middle person, the average person. What on earth does that mean? And our subject for another conversation, right? So now the question is this. Why would you think that a tzaddik would be toiv loy? Let's start with the first category. A tzaddik, and life is good for him. What do you think that means? Why do you think it's good for them in their life? They're a tzaddik spiritually, and it's good for them physically. What do you think that tells us about them? Could mean that they're happy with what they have. Does that imply that the other tzaddik is not happy with what he has? Oh, he hasn't got. Right, that's the Tevya from Fiddler on the Roof. You know, there was a parody that they did on Fiddler on the Roof. So he says, the sages say that you should be happy with your lot. I would be happy, but I don't have a lot. Okay, so what else? Sorry, somebody said something else. Tzaddik v'toiv loy?
And I think if a person is a tzaddik, his behavior is such that wherever he goes, he will draw the good.
So a tzaddik brings out the good wherever they go. Okay, this is already advanced. That's already an advanced perspective. So the simplest perspective of tzaddik v'toiv loy, says the Gemara, is tzaddik gomor. This is an individual who is a complete tzaddik, and because they're a complete tzaddik, therefore Hashem allows them to have bracha in their life. Only good things, as we like to say, right? People always wish each other only good things. So they have only good things. Tzaddik v'ra loy, a tzaddik who has difficulty in their life, that, says the Gemara, is tzaddik she'enoi gomor. This is a tzaddik that is not yet a perfect tzaddik. Now, frankly, I always thought tzaddik was pretty perfect. What do you mean tzaddik she'enoi gomor? A tzaddik who is not a perfect tzaddik. It's a bizarre concept, right? They choose, you say. They choose to have a difficult life. Okay, that's a good point. So maybe there's a tzaddik who feels that they are not yet perfect, as the pasuk says, and we say it at a funeral, Adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yecheta. There's no such thing as a tzaddik on earth who does only good and never sins. So that's why you have tzaddikim who imposed on themselves all kinds of difficulties, whether it was to travel incognito and go into a sense of godless and have to live hand to mouth, or whether it was people in the old days used to go rolling in the snow or sitting on anthills, like really hectic things that, again, don't try this at home. So, okay, so it's a good point. The only thing is that at tzaddik, and this is what's difficult for us, because present company excluded, obviously, but because so many of us are nowhere near a tzaddik, so it's difficult for us to relate to what a tzaddik is actually like. And we tend then to project our own experience onto the tzaddik. So we live with self-doubt. It's quite common. It's part of the human experience. We live with self-doubt. And so we project onto a tzaddik and think, well, maybe tzaddikim also live with self-doubt. And that wouldn't be the case. If a tzaddik does self-impose any kind of difficulty for themselves, it's because they know that that is what Hashem wants for them. It's very different to saying, I feel a certain way. Rather say, they resonate with what Hashem wants. So the point, though, remains the same, and I think you're absolutely correct about this point, that tzaddik who suffers, it's because Hashem is pushing them further. Discomfort is a catalyst for growth. And the flip side is that comfort is a barrier to growth. So that's why you get the tzaddik veraloi, the rasha veraloi, the individual who's a rasha, but also has a difficult life. That's Hashem's nudging that person, trying to get them to do teshuvah. Whereas the tzaddik v'toivloi, the tzaddik whose life is good, well, that is a tzaddik who, the rasha v'toivloi, the rasha whose life is good, as Hashem says, have a nice life. As Rashi said in the parasha this past Shabbos, right? What did Rashi say about kosher food? Rashi says it's like the doctor. The doctor sees two patients. The one patient has a possibility. Please God, they'll heal. So the doctor's very strict with that patient. Follow this diet, do these exercises, etc., etc. The other patient, God forbid, it's ois. There's nothing left. So what does the doctor say? Go home and live it up. So that's the rasha v'toivloi. Hashem says, have a nice life. Right? So that is very much what this Mishnah is telling us. That shalvas harashoim, we don't necessarily understand individuals. We don't understand people. So what we grapple with is, we grapple psychologically. We grapple the fact that here's a person who's a rasha. We know that they're a rasha. Why do they have such a good life? Why is it that tyrants always seem to live forever? You ever noticed? They always seem, forget about the fact that they hold office forever, but they always seem to live forever. Right? Good people, you know what everybody always says, the good die young. You don't say that at somebody's 100th birthday, but, you know, generally speaking, that's what people say, oh, never, somebody young, they were a good person who died. So that's what bothers us. The tzaddik who suffers doesn't always bother us as badly, because who says they're as much of a tzaddik as we think they are? So in our mind, psychologically, we kind of justify to ourselves and say, well, maybe they're not as righteous as I made them out to be. Funny, human psychology, right? We have a heart. That's why it says, first we battle with understanding the good experience of the bad person, because in our minds that's unjust. And we may even battle with the fact that a tzaddik has a difficult time, because somehow in our minds we have a strange way of rationalizing these things. Now, this opens up a big question for us, obviously, this concept of Shalvas HaRashoim and Yisurei HaTzadikim. It's a very, very big topic, and we can't give it a full treatment in the time that we have, but there are some core principles that are really valuable to know. The first core principle is this: whatever we're going to learn about the suffering of tzaddikim, or the goodness, but primarily the suffering of tzaddikim, whatever we're going to learn, there's one key ingredient that you always have to remember. The information is only useful for introspection. It is never suitable for sharing with somebody else. So God forbid somebody else is going through difficulty, you don't go over to them and say, you must be a tzaddik. Because the righteous suffer, right? What do they say? In the secular world, they say there's no rest for the wicked. In Torah, it says there's no rest for the righteous. So you don't go to somebody and say, Nebuch, it's so difficult what you're going through, but at least now you know you're a tzaddik, or something like that. It's not appropriate to say something. Whatever we're going to learn today about the significance, because even though it says Ein b'yodenu means it's not easy for us to understand. It doesn't mean we'll never understand. Yes, of course, Hashem has ways that we will never understand. But it doesn't mean, for example, that we can't probe, and it doesn't mean that if a person is going through difficulty that they can't come to some kind of clarity. And it also doesn't mean, and this is the other key principle, that if we see other people suffering, we should just say, God knows what he's doing. In fact, the best example of that would be Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Because when Moshe goes after the burning bush to confront Paro, to tell him to let the Jews go, what happens? Everything gets worse. So what does Moshe say? Ein b'yodeinu Mi'yisrei hatzadikim, right? He's very, I mean, I think you'll agree Moshe was a pretty righteous individual. He's pretty frum, yes? So if anybody's going to tell us how we're supposed to respond as Torah-observant Jews to somebody else's suffering, it should be Moshe. So you'd expect Moshe to be deeply philosophical at this point in time and say, Ein biyodeinu mi'yisrei hatzadikim. Sorry, we have no understanding of why the righteous suffer. These are the people that Hashem has chosen to put through 210 years of slavery. And then at the time that he says, let's let them free, he only makes it worse. Can't argue. What does Moshe do? What does Moshe do? He goes to Hashem and he says, Lama hare oisa la'am hazeh. Why have you done bad? Can you imagine the chutzpah to say to Hashem, to call Hashem's actions bad? Lama hare oisa la'am hazeh. Why have you done bad to these people? Why does Moshe do that? Because that is the appropriate response to somebody else's suffering. Not to be philosophical, but to be empathetic. Not to accept somebody else's suffering, but to protest it. That's why we daven. If, God forbid, an individual goes through their own suffering, then this is the Mishnah to start learning. Then this Mishnah says, Loi mi'yisrei hatzadikim, we don't understand the suffering of the righteous, but at least we can try and get some kind of a perspective. So let's get a perspective. I don't know where you shop. In all likelihood, one of the places that you shop is probably Kosher World, I would assume. Yes? That's fair to say, right? Okay. So, once upon a time, they've changed it now, but once upon a time when I had an office at Chabad House in Savoy, so there's a little alley. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a little alley. It used to be the spa, now it's the shop, right? So behind there's a little alley. And it was a shtickle shortcut to get to Chabad House. So whenever I used to come from this side of town, I used to go that way, down the alley. And it really, really bothered me. Really bothered me often. I used to drive down the alley. And it really bothered me that there were people getting free food in the alley on a regular basis. Whenever I went into it was the spa in those. Whenever I went into the spa, they used to charge me money for food. And these people in the alley always got the food for free.
You weren't in the alley.
I was. That's the thing. I drove in the alley. And they were getting free food in the alley, and every time I wanted to get food from the spa, they used to charge me. And sometimes I thought they overcharged. And it was really unfair. Right? It was really unfair. Would you agree? So I want to ask you, how many people here would go and get the free food in the alley? You know why not? Because the free food in the alley was in the dumpster that they had in the back of the shop. In the alley. But the food was free. So that's how we look at it. We say, we don't understand. These Rishoyim are getting everything for free. That's how we look at the world, right? That's how we look at the world. We have a perception that says, it's not right. These people are not good people. And everything that they're getting is on a platter, on a silver platter. And I have to schwitz. I'm trying to follow Torah and mitzvahs. And what happens? The next thing, the price of matzah goes up again. You know? That's nothing, by the way. Every single year, there's at least one Facebook group that explodes at this time of the year about how can they charge so much for kosher, Pesach, chocolates, Coke, whatever the case is. Okay, so you can have vegetables, it's okay. You don't have to have kosher for Pesach cereals at 150 Rand a box. Right? It's okay. You can have other things. So I'm trying so hard to do what is right, and I'm schwitzing and I'm suffering. Well, it's not easy. You think it's easy? It's not easy. It's not easy to eat the right amount of matzah within, depending whose Seder you're at, how many minutes, you know. Choose well. Choose well which Seder to go to see how many minutes you get allocated for your kazayas of matzah, right? It's not easy to prepare for Pesach. It's not easy. It's not easy to keep Shabbos. It's not easy to keep kosher. It's not easy. And on top of all of that, I have to have all these tzuras. Look at those people. They just do whatever they want. And Hashem makes their life easy. Everything falls into place. They have money, they have all the things that we perceive, right? Superficially. We believe that they have. Look at this, they have this, they have that. We don't know what goes on behind closed doors, obviously. But there's a deeper message over here. You know what the Jewish people said when they were in the deserts and they were complaining about food? You think it's a new thing that Jews complain about food? No, it's endemic. It's been part of our history. So the Jews complain about the food. What do they say when they get the man? Namon, the very best nutritional product that was ever introduced to humankind, ever in history, and the Jews complain. It's an amazing thing. Can I show you now? Yesterday, so I was at this wedding yesterday, and somebody who was sitting at our table told a story that they went to a Jewish wedding, and they sat at a table with a non-Jewish person, and they couldn't understand the eating habits of the Jewish community. They couldn't understand how much food there was. And then they got told that that was just the starters. So, we have this interesting relationship with food. So the Jews are in the desert and they're complaining about the food. What do they say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Zacharnu es hadaga, remember the fish, asher nochal b'Mitzrayim chinam, that we ate in Egypt for free. I don't know, at your Pesach Seder, when you talk about the story of Egypt, do you ever tell the story about the free fish they used to give out? It's not a big feature, right? It's not something that, why not? Because there is no greater price to pay for something than to pay with your own being. They were slaves. Who cares if we get free fish? What's the difference? They were slaves. So any thinking person is not going to say, we remember the free sushi they used to give us in Egypt. So what are they saying?
It's not free. You had to work for it.
They're saying it's not free. It's the highest price you'll ever pay for anything. You had to work as a slave. You had no independence. What higher price could there be? So what does it say? Chinam mina mitzvos. That's what the Gemara says. Chinam mina mitzvos. It was free of the responsibility of mitzvahs. So Chassidus explains it this way. The verse says, Zacharnu es hadaga, we remember the fish, asher nechal b'Mitzrayim chinam, that we ate in Egypt for free. So Chassidus extracts the phrase as follows, b'Mitzrayim chinam. When things come for free, that tells you you're in Mitzrayim. That tells you that you're in Egypt. The fact that it comes for free. Anybody here own pets? Yes? Do they get fed for free?
Yeah.
But they're b'Mitzrayim. If they were out on the street having to fend for themselves, yes, of course, they'd have to work in order to catch food, in order to eat, but they'd be free. Now they're locked up in your yard. They're b'Mitzrayim chinam. But it's a deeper, sorry?
No, I was going to say, isn't it better for us to earn
Correct, to earn.
everything?
Exactly.
And that's why I think Hashem, in the fact that Adam and Eve did what they did, because otherwise we were going to get everything for free. Now we have to work for it.
Correct.
And that is sweet.
But what's the word? What's the? You're right. So there's value in the things that we work for. As the Zohar uses the expression, we don't want to have nahama d'chisufa, the bread of shame. What's the bread of shame? Well, you get a handout. Nobody wants to get a handout. We want to earn. We want to feel valuable.
That's freedom.
So freedom is not getting things for free. Freedom is the ability to fight your way through and succeed. That's true freedom. That's why we say, and it's coming up later in Pirkei Avos, Ein lecha ben choirin, there's no person who is free except the person who learns Torah.
And prisoners also get food for free.
Exactly, exactly. And you know what's worse than prisoners? God forbid people who are in severely abusive relationships also get things for free as a means of control. So free is not freedom. It's not the same. So Shalvas Horashoim means that they're in Mitzrayim. Now, here's where it gets deep. Here's where it gets deep. That's what you say, fasten your spiritual seatbelts, right? Okay. So you have a pet, yes? You feed your pet? Okay. Anybody here have ants at home? Anybody have ants?
Sometime before the rain.
Right? Do you feed them? Anybody go out and put little bowls of water for ants? Put a little crumbs. You feed ants? No. Right? Exactly. Anything. Why don't you feed ants? Because they're nothing in your life. They're nothing. They don't mean it. They don't add any value to it. If anything, they're a nuisance in your life. They're nothing. They're insignificant. Let's take it a step further. In today's world, I remember seeing this in LA a few years ago, and it blew my mind, walking down the street, and there was a sign, pet psychologist. Pet psychologist. Okay. Is it a thing? I think I'm not here to judge. Could you imagine having an ant psychologist? Is it shaykh? Antcologist, right? Is it shaykh? Is even in the pet? I get it. People get very attached to their pets. They feel that their pets have emotional needs. I get that. Why do we not have ant psychologists? Why not? Because they're nothing in our lives. I'm not saying they don't play a role in the world. Of course they do. Otherwise Hashem would never have created them. But in my life, the ants, unless you have an ant farm, right, doesn't mean a thing to me. When Hashem looks at the world, are we more significant than ants are to humans? From Hashem's perspective. From Hashem's perspective. Right? We've got to be very, very careful how we answer this question. Of course, Hashem looks after the ants too. So let me ask you a question. So, in Hashem's eyes, are we more significant or more relevant to Hashem than an ant is to a human? Definitely not. See, we have a terrible bias. We can't answer this question objectively, because if we answer it wrong, we're in a lot of trouble. That's the problem. We are compelled to say, obviously we're significant in Hashem's eyes. Now that's not accurate. It's not accurate. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not accurate. Let's take it one step further. If you were, theoretically, on the International Space Station, which is not a place for a frum Jew. I mean, it's not a place. So, if you were on the International Space Station, however many times a day they orbit the world, would you turn around and say, hey, I could see my house from here? No, because you can't. Now, I know this is a very crude way to explain it. But if that's how insignificant we look from the vantage point of the International Space Station, how big do you think we appear from the vantage point of infinite God? We are biased. We are biased and we say, of course I count. Obviously I'm important. But that's not an answer. That's an emotional response. We need to know that there is actually somehow a way to prove that we are valuable in His eyes. So being human, does that make you valuable in God's eyes? No. Why would it? Why would it? Being human. We are biased. You see, that's why we battle with this issue. We're biased and we think, obviously I'm significant. I even know that I'm significant because there's some people out there who actually like me. So I must be significant. That's not human. As a human being, are we significant in Hashem's eyes? Let's put it differently. From Hashem's point, can you make yourself, can an ant make itself significant in your eyes? No. Can I make myself, can I as a finite being make infinite God suddenly feel I'm worthwhile? Can I influence God? No. No.
What's your davening there?
What's my, that's a good question. It's a good question. Maybe my davening is just to give me peace of mind.
If you weren't significant, you wouldn't have been created.
So the ant was also created. So therefore the question is, am I more significant than the ant?
So that's the question. Am I more
Fundamental.
obviously significant, but am I more significant?
I don't know if it's obvious. We're biased. So we say it's obviously significant. But if we're honest with ourselves, am I really significant? Or is this maybe all? Remember, one of the motivations of why Hashem created the world is Olam Chesed Yiboneh. Because Teva HaToiv LaHeitiv. Because the nature of one who is good is to share goodness. Maybe Hashem just wants me to have a good life. It doesn't mean that I'm significant to Him. Maybe He's just being nice to me.
No, but the question over here is, am I more significant or am I significant?
I'm starting with the question, am I significant?
Then obviously there's something to it because God created me and ant or whatever it is. It was
Okay, so good. So our bias is playing up in full force. How did Hashem create the world? How did He create the world? He said, right? He spoke. How much did Hashem speak in order to create the world? 10 phrases. 10 phrases. How many phrases will you use in the course of today? Okay? The average woman uses 15,000 words a day.
And a man?
About 7,000. I didn't make that up. That's why, you know, the guy comes to the marriage counselor and he says, I had some words with my wife and she had some paragraphs with me. Anyway, so the point is, so out of the 15,000 odd words that you're going to use today, 10 phrases will amount to what? 50 words, 100 words. If I just stop you at the end of the day today and say, tell me, those 10 phrases that you used today, what did they do? What did they do? What? That's right. What did it do to you? That's when we hurt people. It's a great example. When do we hurt people? When we're not aware of the phrase that we've used. Because the nature of speaking is that when you speak, it doesn't take anything out of you. Of course, if you have a very deep, meaningful, emotional conversation, then it will. But in order for Hashem to create the world, He didn't have a deep, meaningful, emotional conversation. He said, Yehi or, bingo, there's light. So is that significant? In other words, the entire energy that creates everything that we live from in Hashem's vocabulary. Forget about God Himself, just in His vocabulary. 10 phrases compared to God's infinite vocabulary. How significant is it?
Maybe He's not a man of many words.
He's infinite.
But if you look at the Torah, nothing is wasted.
Yes.
Every word in the Torah is made from
Yes.
We were created.
Yes.
There is a significance to Him.
Absolutely.
Nothing extra, like,
But again, we've got to drill this point. You see, we struggle so much with this concept because of our bias. If Hashem wanted to show us that we are deeply significant, then He wouldn't have said just the phrase, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. Bitzalmeinu, even if you want to say Bitzalmeinu Kidmoseinu in a particular image that reflects the divine image. Hashem wouldn't have said it. Hashem would have got invested in the experience, right? And He would have made the man, so to speak, with His hands or some other kind of element. What am I getting at? What I'm getting at, do you know why we're all battling with this? Because we are binary beings, and so we project our binary perspective onto Hashem. In our world, it's either or. Either significant or insignificant. And that's how we see things. So we come to the conclusion, we must be significant in Hashem's eyes. Because it's either or, right? Either we are significant or we're not significant. So we must be significant. Otherwise, everything is a waste. And why did He make us?
Maybe we can speak. And so, but no one else can speak.
So, why does that make us significant?
Why did Hashem choose us?
Why did Hashem choose for us to speak? Because that's part of the Tzalmeinu Kidmoseinu, to be in the divine image. But that doesn't yet tell us that we're significant. I'm not disagreeing with any of these things. The point I want to make is that the binary perspective is where we fall down. The binary perspective is to say that we are either significant or insignificant. It is one of the greatest philosophical issues in Judaism. Is our projection of self onto God. Or as the skeptics will tell you, to create God in the human image. In our world, either the ant is significant or it is not significant. To me, I'm saying, to me. Either the ant is significant to me or it is irrelevant to me. In our world, those are the choices, either or. In Hashem's reality, which is truth, the choices are not binary. In Hashem's reality, both coexist. This is what we need to know. In Hashem's reality, both coexist, which means rationally, we are completely insignificant. Because it cannot make sense to say that a finite being should make a difference to infinite God. It is irrational to suggest that. Rationally, we are insignificant. At the same time, who says Hashem has to behave within the realms of what is rational? Therefore, why are we actually significant? Not because of our value, but because of His choice. That's a big difference. If I think I'm significant because I have value as me, that makes me great, not Hashem great. If I recognize that fundamentally I don't have significance, but Hashem chooses to make me significant, that's a very different way of looking at things. Now, if somebody is insignificant or something is insignificant in our lives, do we care if they succeed or fail? No. So, if you had to see an individual on the side of the road who you've never met before, you have no connection with, you don't stop to think, what wasted talent. That person could have become an engineer, and instead they're panhandling on the side of the road. It doesn't cross our minds because they're not significant in our lives. They're not part of our lives. So to us, it doesn't. We might care enough to help them in the moment, but we don't take on their story and their life because they're not significant in our lives. God forbid, a family member, God forbid, who has tremendous potential, does nothing with their lives. What do? We make their life a misery. Not because our intention, chas v'shalom, is to make their life a misery. To the contrary, because our intention is not to allow them to waste themselves. We choose to take on their pain. We could easily say, it's your life, your choices. We could say that. But there's something so deep within us that doesn't allow us to say that, because this individual is so significant in my life. I can't just say, your life, your choices. Because their pain is our pain. Now, in the human experience, remember, we're created, we're in the divine image. That means that Hashem designed our lives to reflect the way that He interacts with us. In our lives, we don't choose to have that association, connection with a child. It is biologically natural. Child has this part of your heart that lives inside of them. But it's reflective of how Hashem is with us, who He chose to call His children. He didn't have to. He is fundamentally infinite, and we are absolutely finite. He chose to call us His children. So He chose to make our issues bother Him. So what's the worst place that a person could ever be in life? Shalvas harashoim. It's the worst position anybody could be in. To live a good life, which effectively indicates that Hashem has said, their life is no longer significant, that I want to push them in a healthy direction. So, ein b'yodenu, we can't get our heads around this principle until we learn it. Mishalvas harashoim, that the tranquility, the good life of the Rasha, it's not just because, of course we know this, because there's another life, and maybe they'll have a great life here, but in the next world it's not even that. It's not about the next world. Right now they are living the most pitiful existence that could be. An existence where Hashem says, it's not significant to me. Free food from the dumpster. Because I don't even know who they are. Whereas on the other hand, the suffering, the difficulty, and the challenges of tzaddikim, we don't understand them. We're not willing to accept them. Like Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't accept the fact that the Jews suffered. He had to protest it, and we have to protest the suffering of other people. But principally, the idea behind that suffering is, as the pasuk says, Ashrei hagever asher tiyasrenu ka. Happy is the person who Hashem gives challenges. Challenges. Because that means there is relationship. That means you are significant. If Hashem, who is infinite, chooses to look at my life in that much detail, chooses to get involved in my life and give me things that will force me to have to learn new skills, perspectives, etc., will force me to grow. If Hashem has taken that interest, Ashrei, I'm actually quite happy to be on the radar. Happy to be in a relationship. Happy to have to pay for my groceries. because it means I have a face-to-face relationship with the proprietor of the store. The people getting the free stuff outside will never ever meet the owner. And the owner will never know who they are. So it's quite a powerful principle for us to get. Again, we don't chas v'shalom ever justify any person ever having difficulties. This Mishnah is for our introspection. When we go through difficult times, this is our go-to Mishnah. When somebody else goes through difficult times, we pack away the Mishnah and we go help them. That's the correct response. Okay, still half a Mishnah left, right?